The Classical Style by Charles Roson. Theories of form.
The original meaning of sonata was played and it gradually acquired a more specific sense. It's not a definite form like a minuet or a da capo aria.
The complexity of sonata form.
The line between the acquired and defining characteristics of a form is often blurred. Even composers of the period may not have been able to draw it with certainty. The traditional account of sonata form as a melodic structure is misleading. Haydn often used only one theme, while Mozart preferred an entirely new theme to mark the change to the dominant. A sonata is not built with a succession of themes as its structure. It's a feeling for proportion, direction, and texture rather than a pattern.